Okay.
Perfect. Okay, I should really introduce you again, Bob, but I think that introduction was there. So that was Bob Foley handing over now and to talk us through flight termination systems, impact reduction systems. So over to you, Bob.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. Just by way of housekeeping, just a quick note, if everybody could keep on mute. I do absolutely welcome questions throughout and afterwards, but just while the actual presentation is on, if you could stay on mute, and as usual, pressing your space bar is the quick way to unmute for a question. So this evening, we're going to talk about impact reduction systems and flight termination systems. And this talk is on behalf of the Unmanned Aircraft Association of Ireland. So first thing we're going to be looking at is what we're going to be looking at, really. We're going to cover the regulations around this. We're going to be looking at flying in the open category and why this is actually so important for flight termination systems and impact reduction systems. We're going to look at both of those systems, what they are, why they are very different systems, and how to actually interpret them. And then, of course, at the end, we'll have a Q&A and discussion. We'll open up the mic, so to speak, to the room, and so we can talk to everybody. And of course, as always, please ask as many questions as you can. Moving on then. The big question, I suppose, if you're very new to this, is to understand what are impact reduction systems and flight termination systems, fundamentally what the difference is. The first one can basically be said is a requirement to stop the aircraft from uncontrolled flight or to terminate the ability for the aircraft to stay aloft. If you have a drone that is uncontrolled, you must be able to, in some way, shape, or form, press a button and it stops flying. It no longer is an aircraft, it is now just a plummeting rock, falls to the ground as fast as it possibly can. That is an absolute requirement within the regulations. An impact reduction system, on the other hand, more commonly known as a parachute, is a system to reduce the amount of kinetic energy imparted by the drone as it descends. So a parachute is a very good example of that. It slows the drone down, thus reducing the amount of energy in the drone. So when it actually gets to the ground or something close to it, it does not have a dangerous amount of energy contained within it that will be imparted onto the ground or people or assets. Why do we need these systems? In the open category, they are not required, even though the new C-class drones that are coming in, we may see some of these systems in those. But in the specific category at the moment, if you need to operate in the specific category, you're pretty much required to have at least one or both of those systems. For two big reasons. One, air risk. Two, ground risk. And for those of you who are maybe unfamiliar with those, air risk is a drone hitting something in the air or being a danger to other aircraft or airspace users. And the ground risk is the drone impacting something or someone on the ground. So the mass of the drone or the uncontrolled mass of that drone either going into somebody or falling down upon somebody, that is the ground risk. We need the FTS system to fundamentally kill the aircraft so that it doesn't, for instance, if I'm flying close to Dublin Airport, suddenly fly in front of an aircraft or into the airport itself or something like that uncontrolled. And for the ground risk, we need to make sure that if the drone does begin to fall out of the sky, that it falls in a, roughly speaking, controlled manner with low kinetic energy. And then the final reason, of course, is we actually want to protect our drone. Believe it or not, for everybody here who's bought a whole lot of expensive drone gear, the regulations don't really care how expensive your drone is. That they really only care about air risk and ground risk. But we, of course, care about the amount of money we spent on our drones, so we want to protect that. And one of the key points to remember about that is if we as humans are hesitant to press our flight termination system and watch our drone plummet to the ground, we need to overcome that. We need to be sure that our systems are working and that we trust our systems so that when we press that flight termination button, we know a parachute will deploy and the 20 grand's worth of drone we can see flying or falling from the sky will be protected by that parachute and fall in a more gentle manner, and we won't have a big mess of carbon fiber in front of us. So let's quickly look at the open category. And one of the reasons we're going to look at this is because while the specific category is, let's say, the territory for flight termination systems and parachutes and whatnot. The open category is where we're almost encouraged these days to fly as much as we can. We want to really make sure we're doing as much as possible in the open category, because it gives us as drone operators the most flexibility to actually fly with the least amount of, let's say, restriction in terms of adding gear like parachutes and FTS systems. So first one, just to remind everybody, Open A1, really teeny tiny small drones. You can see here we got the little Mavic Mini 2, I think it is. Weighs just about double what an iPhone weighs, roughly speaking. About that. Things like the Mini series are absolutely fantastic. The new Mini 3 Pro there has got obstacle avoidance now, really sexy camera, very light still. It comes in under that 250 gram barrier, which means you can use it in an awful lot of places where putting a bigger drone is fundamentally illegal or very difficult. Personally, as a drone operator, as a professional drone operator, think the Mini series is a fantastic drone to use in a professional basis. The only problem with it is, of course, it doesn't look good for the customers. They think, why am I paying you so much money for that teeny tiny drone? But we all know that using a sub 250 gram drone is actually an excellent way of acquiring data in otherwise restrictive airspace. Open A2, this is where an awful lot of us want to be or want to operate these days, very much in the small but very capable drone space, the place where the traditionally Phantoms and Mavics, and of course the new Mavic 3 and things like that, all sort of operate. Slightly more restrictive. There was and there is, sorry, an IAA directive that reduced the distance between people and Open A2 category drones down a bit. That will expire, I believe, in October, but it does allow us an awful lot of leeway to get work done with Open A2 category drones, but in semi-restrictive airspace, let's say. And then finally, of course, the Open A3. This is where basically we can operate pretty much any drone we want, so long as it's below 25 kilograms and far from people, of course. So for me personally, I find I'm doing an awful lot of work in Open A3. If I'm around wind turbines and stuff like that, I'm pretty much covered by Open A3. And in fact, I've chosen my systems, and I've chosen my specifically my parachute systems, because Open A3 exists and I like to operate in it as opposed to operating under my specific category authorization. I want to turn you over to Julie for a moment there now. She's just going to cover a little bit on involved and uninvolved persons, because it's such an important concept to understand when we talk about all of these sorts of things.
Thanks, Bob. And just, I suppose, once in the open category, everything is about the distance and either the size of the drone and then coupled with the distance that we're keeping from people. When we get into the specific category, we look at the predefined risk assessments, SOAR risk assessments, everything else. It's all defined on what's the volume of people on the ground, whether or not they're involved or uninvolved people, and then how far away from them we stay. So it's really important to be clear on what involved people are and what uninvolved people are. The latest decision from EASA, which was published it's about 2 months ago now, did give some clarity in the guidance material around involved versus uninvolved people. And basically, an uninvolved person is going to be a person that doesn't take part in the operation at all. They have nothing to do with the operation. They're a random person, but they could be potentially affected by the actual operation itself. But a change in the latest definition of uninvolved persons in the latest edition of the regulation says that a person protected by a shelter, so for example, a roof, an overhang, maybe a bus stop could be considered, are not considered to be affected by the UAS operation. And they're not exposed to the direct risks of the operation if the max takeoff weight of the drone is below 25 kilos, or if you comply with criteria 2 of M1 mitigations for SORA. So that does give a little bit of flexibility and leeway. There was a discussion at one point about the driver of a car becoming uninvolved person, so therefore you would have to maintain your minimum distances. That hasn't been brought in from a regulatory point of view, but it is a really good consideration, because you should be keeping ideally the minimum distances from vehicles, and particularly if if a vehicle is driving down the road, the distraction that a drone could cause an accident. So that's uninvolved persons. So basically, there's somebody who's not involved in the operation, and unless they're completely protected from the operation, they should be deemed to be an uninvolved person. So all of the limitations of distance applies to those uninvolved people. When you look to involve somebody in the operation, then there are certain considerations And the first is that they must have given explicit consent. Now that explicit consent can be verbal, but coming with I'll just put my barrister wig on for a second. And the only time that whether or not consent is valid and has been given and has been properly recorded is when something has actually gone wrong and you're in court and you're sitting in court. So the way to dismiss that, the way to draw a line under that immediately from the outset is having that explicit consent in writing. And if you're on a building site or something like that, that a person that it's a drone operating, that you're an involved person, that briefing being included. So when a person signs a document, their safety briefing at the end of it, it's deemed that they have given explicit consent to be involved in a drone operation. And then the second thing is that they must have been properly briefed on the risks that are associated with the operation and what actions they should take in order to, if they get some instruction, if there's a foghorn blows or you shout at them or whatever it is, what actions they should take in that situation where there's possibly a catastrophic failure of the drone. So properly briefed, aware of the risks of the operation and given explicit consent. So they should also be able to, though there is some, and this is guidance material, they should be able to decide whether or not to be involved in the UAS operation. And this, the reason for this is that they don't want to end up that you say to somebody, you're an involved person if you're here, and then they either can't do their job or they can't attend a concert or whatever it is, they can't go to an event because you've said a drone is going to be there. So I want to try and reduce that risk. And that they're not restricted as well to partaking in the activity that they want to partake in if they refuse to be an involved person. So again, involved person, explicit consent, knows the risks and knows what to do in the event of a failure. And then just one other thing that I just want to point out is that this does not apply to assemblies of people, involved or uninvolved people. Assemblies of people are a different thing. They're a group of people who are together, who are so closely packed together that they cannot avoid the consequence of a drone falling from the sky. So an assembly of people is not defined by the volume of people or the amount of people. It's defined by how closely they are packed together. And in the open category, you are never allowed to operate close or over assemblies of people. And in the specific category, there has to be very significant mitigations and redundancies put in place before you would ever be allowed to do that. So that's just, I suppose, the clarity between involved, uninvolved, and also then assemblies of people. So with that, I will hand back over to you, Bob.
Thanks, Julie. That's great. It's such a curious legalese term, involved and uninvolved persons, that it's always good to have somebody explain that who actually, can read that sort of stuff. Great. So now we're going to get into the weeds, the nerdy stuff. We're going to look at flight termination systems. Most of what I'm going to talk about from here on is about broad topics about the array of products that is actually available on the market at the moment. Most of the specific details I'm going to give are about consumer level products. So the sort of things you can put on Mavics and Matrices, M600s, maybe things like that. If you're into custom drones and stuff like that, there are absolutely solutions available. Most of those solutions are from the same companies we're talking about. Most of the technologies are the exact same, but they would be uniquely applied to whatever custom drone you are building or trying to generate. But everything I'm going to talk about today is at the consumer level or the prosumer level, let's say. Okay, so FTS types, flight termination system types. Let's look at what we actually can get, what's good and bad about them, and what we absolutely have to have. So the first big one everybody should know about flight termination systems is the old killing the drone with the two thumbs sort of maneuver. Is no bueno here. It's not an acceptable flight termination system. Why? Because it's not independent of the C2 link. That is to say, it is not independent of the normal control link. When we purchase an FTS system for the specific category operations, it has to have an independent link between the mechanism of termination and the actual termination button itself. A big one there, very, very important. So anything that requires routing through the through the C2 link is not allowed, I'm afraid. With that in mind, then we can look at how we can terminate. So 3 broad ways of terminating: mechanical, hard electrical, and soft electrical, okay, or electronic, let's say. Mechanical is very simple. You can see here on the Mavic here, On the Para Zero model, which I'll go into in more detail in a moment, these arms spin, get in the way of the propellers, mechanically stop them, and the drone falls out of the sky. That's it. That's simple. It just mechanically makes the drone not a viable flying machine. Once it does that, then everything else happens after that, but that's how it does it. It does it mechanically. Hard electrical means that you are not relying on the software or the electronics of the drone itself in order to terminate flight. So on this one here, on this M300, what they do is they put a little box there, which basically contains a switch or a circuit breaker between the battery and the aircraft. And this little box has a link back down to the to a controller in the person's hand. And they can, independent of any of the actual drone controls themselves, independent of the C2 link, press the button, and in here via radio remote, a switch is thrown, the battery is disconnected from the aircraft at the source, and the aircraft no longer is a viable flying machine. Similar system operates here on this Mavic. A little insert is put between the actual battery and the drone, and a radio link down to the controller is established. And if the person presses the button, this disconnects the battery completely from the aircraft. This is different to the DRS system here, which sends an electronic signal through to the drone and asks the drone or tells the drone, please terminate all flight or please stop the rotors. The problem with this system relative to this system or this system is that this one relies on a viable electronic system within the drone. As far as I can tell, it uses the API of the drone. So this is one that one could say a less robust system than this one. However, all the systems that we can see here are acceptable as flight termination systems by the authorities, as far as we can tell. Next, we can look at trigger mechanisms. So trigger mechanisms fall into, roughly speaking, three categories: manual, manual automatic, and fully automatic. Because we require human-in-the-loop flight termination, fully automatic systems are not viable. So you can, if you Google around, find pretty cheap parachute systems, for instance, and they have FTS capability built in, but they're fully automatic. They rely on the fact that the drone is falling through the sky at a certain speed, or a certain parameter has gone outside its norms, and therefore please terminate flight and deploy parachute. That's not allowed. You have to have basically a button that the human has to be able to press on the ground, which means fully automatic systems are not allowed. What that means then is that we're only restricted to manual or manual and automatic. From my perspective, the manual and automatic systems are the best. You get the best of both worlds. If you're not fast enough in an uncommanded flight termination, if you're not fast enough to press your button, at least the automatic system will deploy your parachute for you. But if you rely on a fully manual system, then you have to be able to see your drone falling and press the button and hope you had enough time and you were at enough altitude to be able to catch it. A rare thing, so basically manual and automatic is the way to go there. And most good systems on the market today will have manual and automatic functionality. Next, we come to a bit of a contentious issue of integration. This is one that is, it's very important to take a good look at this if you are in the market to purchase these systems. There is hard and soft integration. Another way of saying that is there is integration where I can go to my drone, remove all the systems, and it will seem like there was never, ever a parachute system installed on the drone. Or I pick a system that requires surgery of the drone. So somebody has to take some parts off, take a board out, solder some bits to it, do some jiggery pokery, put it all back together. And now the drone has been altered from the state you received it from the manufacturer. I'm not saying either way is good or bad, but there is certainly considerations to be had when purchasing a drone system. Whether you're happy that you want an integration that does interfere with the drone on the internal side, whether you're happy to have somebody soldering away on your drone. There are some excellent professionals in the country who can do this sort of work. The OEM, the manufacturers of the parachutes can do the work also. They can perform that surgery for you, but it is a question that you should ask before going down the route of a FTS system that requires surgery on your drone. Another one to consider on FTS systems is the activation altitude. And I've heard this from the mouth of the horse, the IAA themselves. There is no FTS system that they will accept that does not activate from 0 altitude. That is to say, you cannot have an FTS system that does not come online, let's say above or below 10 meters or something like that. FTS systems have to be active from the moment flight takes place, from the moment the aircraft leaves the ground. So just be wary of purchasing any system that does not have that feature. It's pretty much a feature in all systems, but just be wary of it. And then the final element I will talk about, and you'll find it's rather difficult to get information out of manufacturers on this, the range of your FTS system is important. Remember, the primary role of the FTS system from the perspective of the authorities is to be able to terminate uncommanded flight and bring that aircraft down in a controlled manner so that we do not have a runaway aircraft that is possibly infringing on delicate airspace and stuff like that. So if the range of your FTS system is quite small, make sure you're flying within that range when you are utilizing the privileges of the specific category that you're operating under. In terms of actually what they look like on the aircraft, you can see it all there. But of course, in your hand, this is the sort of thing you might have. There's some rather dangerous looking things. I think if you pull them out in a bank, people would think you're going to blow it up. But there's some rather elegant ones then. This little teeny tiny box here is the entirety of the FCS system that comes from Dronavia, for instance. This monstrosity down here, I don't know why it's that big, but it is another example of, let's say, how we could not design it. And then these two on the extremes here and here are pretty standard from most companies, you'll see. But certainly the Dronavia one, in my opinion, is a very neat little system that they've generated there. Next, we're going to talk about impact reduction systems, or of course, to everybody else, parachutes. So let's look at the details of parachutes and what you want to be thinking about when you're purchasing a parachute or when you're even looking at one for your particular systems. So the first thing we can talk about is the deployment mechanisms. There's a bunch of different deployment mechanisms available. They can roughly be broken down into mechanical and not mechanical. Let's look at them in detail. So the first one is CO2 gas canisters. Anybody who's ever seen a life jacket will be familiar with these. They're used in all manner of things. They're available all over the place. In most countries in the world, you can probably purchase a CO2 gas canister. It's a very standard object, let's say, that is purchasable. It's not very dangerous. It's relatively speaking inert. I believe you can travel with them on aircraft so long as they're not attached to the device on which they will be used. In fact, I actually happen to know there's about 200 and something of them on a 737 because every life jacket under your seat has one of them. So there you go for that. They're just a safe little object, and the CO2 gas itself is used to push the parachute out and actually deploy it. Very, very standard stuff. CO2 gas is the primary deployment mechanism on all of the Dronavia range, for instance. Next, we'd have springs, bungees, and catapults. Springs, bungees, and catapults are all basically simple mechanical systems. So some sort of spring like this, some sort of coiled spring that pushes something, or in the instance of the DRS system here, what you have is a bunch of bungee cords, bits of rubber. You push the thing down. When it releases, it just springs it out like that. Very simple. Again, can be made completely inert, not very dangerous, certainly not the sort of thing that somebody in, let's say, airport security would look at and go, I don't like the look of that. They'll question you about it, but they certainly wouldn't have any problems with it. And finally, the big elephant in the room is the pyrotechnic devices, or MGGs, microgas generators. These are the ones that I personally would steer clear of. You'll probably be fine if you never, ever want to operate anywhere except in Ireland with these. But if you start to look at traveling and stuff like that, traveling with a device with pyrotechnics in it can be difficult, can be difficult. If you talk to Para Zero, they use a MGG system, microgas generator. I personally believe that that's a fancy way of saying, or a non-offensive way, let's say, of saying pyrotechnic, but have a word with them and see if they have a good history of being able to board aircraft with that. I would be more than happy. But just be wary of any system that uses pyrotechnics over the CO2 and spring bungee catapult mechanisms. That is the deployment systems. Let's look at power sources. There's two broad power sources we can use: its own battery or the aircraft battery. Okay, there's benefits and cons to both of them, so let's look at those real quick. If it's got its own battery system, the biggest thing to look out for yourself is the battery life of that system, because you probably can't replace the battery in it. It's probably integral to the system, or trying to charge it on the day is difficult. And anybody who does a lot of all-day flying will know the importance of good battery strategy. So anything with its own battery or that requires its own battery in order to run, just make sure you've got a good strategy in place and know your battery life. The other one then is where they use the aircraft battery or capacitors. So the DRS system, for instance, takes a constant feed from the aircraft battery, very, very low, but it charges capacitors. So if the aircraft completely dies, the DRS system does have the ability to deploy still, because the capacitors can supply the required power to deploy the parachute, even with a dead aircraft. So just on the power source, keep an eye on those. Again, on trigger types, we got the three, and the exact same concepts apply for the parachute to the FTS systems: manual, automatic, and automatic only. Automatic only systems are no good here. We pretty much need to work in the manual or manual and automatic. So same rules apply there. This is a big one that I've had discussions with a couple of UAI members on: reusability. There's some systems where if you purchase it and you press the pop button, you got to pay somebody a whole bunch of money to get it repacked, or you got to pay somebody a whole bunch of money for them to send you a whole new parachute pack to actually install back onto your aircraft. You don't want this thing going pop accidentally at 9 o'clock in the morning on your first day of a weeks-long campaign. So having a good reusable system and a repackable system is an important consideration when purchasing these. So the three kinds we can basically have are end user and field repackable. That could be you actually fold up the parachute and repack it, or it could be you just have two parachute modules. If one goes pop, you take it out and you put the new one in, and off you go again. The second one would be service center repackable. That is to say, they're sent to a service center. So for instance, one of the guys who supplies parachutes here in Ireland, they could do it in country, or they could sort you out on the day, or maybe within 24 hours or something like that. And then from my perspective, the worst case scenario is OEM only repackable. That is to say, we got to send this thing to the USA or Canada or Israel to get it fully repacked and certified and so on and so forth. And we got to, spend money doing that in terms of packaging, and then paying for the actual repack itself, and so on and so forth. So from my perspective, this would be the least desirable design of reusable systems. Other elements to consider is the altitude. So there's typically two altitudes you want to look at in parachute systems. The altitude at which it arms, typically you want that to be 0. It doesn't make a massive amount of sense, but from the IA's perspective, it does, because they're usually integral with the FTS system. And then the minimum deployment altitude, that is to say, the minimum effective deployment altitude, how low it is before, or how low the drone can be before it won't turn to complete mush if the parachute deploys. So I've seen some quite low, I think as low as maybe 20 meters. I'd love to see that in a video in the real world, but I think some of them you're going up towards 40 and 50 meters minimum before they actually become effective. Now, we've pointed out the obvious elephant in the room many times to the relevant authorities about that particular situation, but the rules is the rules, and we got to follow them. We have, had our wars with them on this, but anyway. Final one then, and this is a big one for me personally, is removability. I think anybody here who's done a bit of flying with these systems realizes that for the most part, you actually don't fly with them. You're operating in the open category, or you're operating in a scenario that basically does not require a parachute and FTS system. And so you don't want that extra complexity added to the aircraft. You don't want that extra weight added to the aircraft, and you don't want to be constantly using this system. This is certainly an additional set of factors to put into any flight planning and stuff like that. And so being able to not fly with an FTS system efficiently is a very good thing. So I would certainly look at the integration level of your of all the systems if you were going to purchase one. Personally, I went with the DRS system myself because of the removability of it. I literally turn the canister, remove it, and now I'm operating in open category and very happy with that. I believe some of the other systems are quite similar, even though I didn't find one to my liking at the time. But just look at your removability factor when you're looking at these. If you have to get out 4 different Allen keys and then, you know, twist a little knob and adjust some firmware every time you install and remove this thing, it's possibly not the right system for you. Final one to consider then, mount points. Some of these systems do take up payload locations, or they affect payload locations. When you purchase these systems, if you are purchasing, for instance, the M300 system, if you're dead set on using the top mount, there's some systems that occupy that top mount point and cannot go anywhere else. There are systems that look like they occupy the top mount point, but they also offer alternative mounting points. So just be sure to look at exactly how it integrates with the aircraft and will it affect your desired use of that aircraft. So let's talk quickly about some manufacturers. I just want to quickly give an overview of who's available on the market at the moment. Then we're going to go through a whole bunch of different parachute systems at a top level and touch on 1 or 2 more elements, and then we're pretty much done. So in terms of manufacturers, we got ParaZero, one of the big ones. They have a local supplier in Ireland. Fruity Chutes come from America. No local supplier as far as I know. Dronavia, French local suppliers as well. Drone rescue systems are Austrian. They have local supplier and they obviously supply over the internet. I believe it's Opale Parachutes from France. I don't know of a local supplier. Flyfire from China, no local supplier. Indemnis from the USA, no local supplier. And AVSS, I believe, from Canada, and no local supplier on those either. In terms of what's available then, I'm going to quickly shoot through a whole bunch of stuff. I'm basically showing you how they integrate on the aircraft and what they kind of look like with your particular aircraft, just to give you an idea of what's actually out there. So this is the M600 range. This is roughly speaking what's available from ParaZero, ParaZero there, Dronavia there, and DRS down here. Moving on then, we got the M300 systems. I think a very common aircraft these days. The DRS system there sitting out in the arm. This is the Dronavia system. There's 2 different systems available from Dronavia. One goes on the top mount, but this system can also go underneath as far as I can tell. They also do a twin parachute system which attaches on the leg areas here. So that doesn't occupy the top or bottom payload points. More M300 systems. This is from ParaZero. That one uses an MGG, just to be aware. This is the AVS system from Canada, uses springs, and even though it seems like it's on top, it's not actually on the top payload system or on the top payload point. And then the Indemnis system there, I don't know a massive amount about that one. It's a relatively new one as far as I can tell, but they occupy a location on the side. There is, I'd have to remember, actually, I don't remember if they have an FTS system associated with their unit. Moving on then, the M200 series, again, Dronavia cover that, ParaZero cover it, and DRS cover it. Moving on to the Inspire series, Fruity Chutes certainly do one. You'll see this, it's labeled Skycat, but that's a sub-brand of Fruity Chutes, but from what I can tell. Dronavia do one and Indemnis do one also. You can see 3 sort of very different integration models Dronavia on either side, Fruity Shoots vertically on one side, and Indemnis horizontally on one side. So different strategies there. M30, new on the market, but DRS have a model coming out. Dronavia have a model they've just released. It's on the website at the moment. Again, I believe using CO2 as their deployment mechanism. Going on to the Phantoms then, Para Zero do one. You can see the mechanical system here is the whole item turns to block the rotors and thus make it an unviable aircraft. Dronavia using their CO2 system, and Fruity Shoots using almost literally looks like a human parachute pack, little stuck onto the side there, and ready to go. New model just released here on the Mavic series. This model from Dronavia actually applies to most of the smaller Mavic style drones these days. So the Autels and stuff like that, I believe it'll go on that too. I think maybe the Skydios as well. I'm not 100%. Para Zero, similar system, sits on top, but this is spring activated as opposed to, sorry, I think they're both spring activated, my apologies. What else we got? Indemnis do a system for the Mavics, and AVSS do a system as well. I haven't seen one for the Mavic 3 from Dronavia or Para Zero yet, but that's not to say they don't have one in the works. I know DRS, for instance, have a Mavic 3 system in the works. It should be released, so I wouldn't be surprised if these two guys do have one also. So that's AVSS, that's the Canadian brand, if you remember. Fruity Shoot have a system that looks like that, and Flyfire, which is from China, have a system like that. Again, just to remind you, this system, for instance, is only a parachute. It's only a parachute, so no good for a specific category because there's no C2 link independent flight termination system. That's the key element there. So if anybody wants to get a quick screenshot of that, it will be in the recording anyway, but that's a manufacturer's summary. Want to quickly touch on manufacturers and location a moment. This is an important one to consider. I'm going to give you some personal recommendations here. These are not on behalf of the UAI. These are just my personal recommendations. I would try to purchase a drone in Europe if I could. And the reason for that is really simple. Drones in Europe are built around the regulations in Europe. Drones in America are built around the regulations in America, and so on and so on. So, for instance, the Austrian crowd, DRS, the French crowd, Dronavia, the Israelis, less so, but they do have a lot of very Europe-compatible drone parachuting and FTS systems. So I personally would stick to one of the top 3 there if I was looking for a system. I would be looking at one of these 3 guys. Most of them, they all have representation in Ireland. They also can all be dealt with directly, I'm sure, but they will just tell you go to the local representative. And just in case you're unaware of who that is, you need to be talking to Shane in Munster Drone Services, you need to be talking to Mark in Unmanned Solutions, and you need to be talking to Damien in DroneWorks Ireland. Okay, those are the 3 people in Ireland, as far as I can tell, and I'm very much open to correction, who will be able to advise and supply you with systems like those. So though that's the sort of topography of who manufactures drone the parachutes and FTS systems in the world, as far as I can tell. Want to quickly touch on standards. It's an important one, and you'll see it on all the advertising. There are, at this moment in time, no official EASA or IAA standards. They do not exist yet. EASA has not published anything. There's no such thing as a standard around FTS systems or around parachutes. However, the American Society for Testing and Materials, ASTM, have released the strangely named F3322-18, which is a standard for specification for small unmanned aircraft system parachutes. I have talked to the IAA about this. They certainly recognize it, but they do not require it, and neither do the regulations. So just to be clear, if you are purchasing a parachute and it is ASTM compliant, they will be happy to see that. It makes their life easier. They know it has a certain minimum standard, but it is not a requirement when you purchase a parachute and submit it for their approval. It is not a requirement. Quick word on warranty and insurance, because these are the big sort of red flags that we all sort of think about when we look at things like parachutes. We're basically taking an expensive object, attaching a slightly less expensive object to it, and hoping that one will save the other. But if it doesn't, who pays what for who, and so on and so forth. From the aircraft manufacturer's perspective, if they are looking at any given case of warranty, if it is absolutely clear that there was a third-party object attached, they may and they may not honor their warranty. That is a consideration that you should have when you go to do this. Now, we've had long discussions here in the committee about, how to proceed around this particular, minefield, but there is no clear or real answer. The IAA can't give you one, the EASA can't give you one. We certainly can't. It's just a thing that you have to deal with. It's just a bit of a mess, and that's just the way of it. You might get something out of your parachute manufacturer if there's an absolute failure of some description and that some serious money has been lost. You might get something out of your aircraft manufacturer, but just it's an important thing to look at when you are looking at these systems. If you're running a business, you need to know that you are covered in some way, shape, or form. We can say that from an insurance perspective, and this is comes from Cover Drone themselves, if it is a regulatory requirement to attach a given device to your aircraft, and you have gone and installed it correctly and flown with that device, then from their perspective, you are covered. So that is one rather significant and large drone insurance company basically saying that yes, parachutes are acceptable things that can be attached to drones, and they are okay to have because it is a regulatory requirement. Okay, but as always with insurance, check the small print. Now nope, that's it. Sorry. Now, guys, I'm done talking. I'm going to shut up unless somebody asks me a question. But please feel free to ask as many questions you can. I would hope as well that there's not just me, but a whole bunch of experts in the room who can answer questions about drones that I might not have or products that I might not be aware of. That's it. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks a million, Bob. If anybody has questions, please just shout them out. I just wanted to add one thing. It was a really great presentation, Bob, really informative. I think puts a lot of clarity around where we are and what we're doing with them. One of the things I suppose that just to mention it as around C5 drones and where this requirement comes from. This requirement is coming because people are either operating under SORA or under the PDRAs, and the PDRAs require to have flight termination and parachutes. But the idea is that when we have C5 and C6 drones, that they will be inbuilt into these drones, so that we won't have to start attaching these third-party, equipment onto our drones. But I don't want to put anybody off not buying a drone. We will still be able to operate. If you go out and you've bought your drone and you buy a parachute for your drone in order to be able to operate under PDRA or under SOAR, whatever it is, you can still do that and on into the future after we have C5 drones. Okay, it doesn't just stop as soon as C5 drones come out on the market that you can't fly your legacy drone. You will still be able to operate with your legacy drone until at least January 2024, and it will be onwards beyond that as well. At the moment, they're talking about C5 drones, which are drones which will have these flight termination systems and parachutes inbuilt in them. As part of the design and as part of their classification systems, they'll have them. And just the latest word from EASA on that, literally last night, was that that they are hoping to have those on the market in mid-2023. They're hoping for the standards to be defined by the end of this year with notified bodies. There are some notified bodies out there already. And by the end of this year, or certainly early Q1 next year, and then by the time the manufacturers actually, a lot of the manufacturers are involved in, certainly the larger OEMs are involved in the submissions for the standards that will be required for these. So they're involved, they know already what is required. I keep disappearing. I'm just like, how do I manage that?
Cały czas płacę za to wszystko.
Sorry, somebody's just not on mute there. So just, I suppose the point in this is mid next year, we should have C5, C6 drones. We'll be able to operate them under standard scenarios if we want to. But the point is that we don't have to, you know, we can carry on using our legacy drones after, even when C5, C6 with our third party equipment attached to them. So just don't want to put people off or people to think that they're not going to buy their drone or their parachute or whatever else now. It is worthwhile, and it means it gives you that flexibility to operate in the specific category as well. So that was just my point. And it just to reinforce one of the points that Bob made there as well about the buying your parachute systems from a recognised person here in Ireland is really important, and also making sure that it's a European parachute, because with China we've gone through some, sorry Greg, I think you're not on mute there. Yeah, thanks. We've gone through an approval process at the moment, and if you take some of the Chinese drones that are available, Chinese parachute systems that are available on the market, trying to decipher whether or not, even whether they're flight termination systems, is extraordinarily difficult. And it will be much harder when you put those in as a risk mitigation to actually claim the credit that you should be able to claim the credit for in significantly reducing your ground risk. So just a couple of additional points to note on that. But really, thanks a million, Bob. Absolutely brilliant presentation. And hopefully I'll hand it over and to questions, if anyone has any questions, or if anybody
we seem to have one from
as well has any other experience that they want to bring forward as well. Sorry, go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, we seem to have a question here. Sorry, I don't know your name. BA is on my screen here.
Hi, Bob. It's Mark Arnold here. Thank you for a really good presentation, and Julie as well for the more in-depth knowledge. And I suppose it's a fascinating topic and a really very relevant topic. And we could probably, all of us could ask questions for the whole of the night, but I'll just ask one question and probably somebody else will ask loads more. But it's an interesting one about the range of the FTS. And as I think you mentioned in your conversation, we don't ever want to test it, but at the same time, as pilots, we are supposed to fly within the range. We know when our range is, when we're running into trouble from our normal C2 control systems, because we're having problems. But it's a much more difficult one to know what the range of the FTS is, because we don't really want to probably try it out. I'm just wondering, would anybody have any advice as to how best to make sure that we are happy to be within that range?
I would suggest talking to your manufacturer. The reason I say that is because I did that, and I talked to a number of manufacturers on the telephone. They might print one number, but they'll tell you a whole other one, and it could be orders of magnitude bigger. And they'll tell you on the phone that, look, we've done this out to 2 kilometers, 3 kilometers, and so on, and it worked just fine. There was a direct connection. We were able to execute. Remember, they've done testing on these things, and so you might find that even though there might be a number printed in a manual somewhere, that number is actually much bigger in the real world. Now, what you do with that unofficial number is up to yourself, but that might be a way to alleviate your concerns, let's say.
Yeah, I'll just add just one more thing into that. For Bart, my understanding from the point of view of when we have a C5 drone is that the readout that we'll receive will be from the C2 link, but also from the flight termination system, that we will have a monitoring of those signals, because we'll have 2 independent systems that will have that. But unfortunately, we don't. A lot of the current systems that are out there don't have any notification of a loss of signal or a weakening of the signal for the flight termination systems. But having said that, as long as we're operating within what the manufacturer's guidelines are, we're keeping ourselves legal. So again, it would be important just to check, what does the manufacturer say? What does the manufacturer give as the range and that range finder, and then to make sure that you're limiting your own flight to within that range. That's all we can do for now, is rely on the information that the manufacturers are giving us. Remember as well, to claim the credit for the M2 under a SORA risk assessment, you must have the 2 things. One is that the safety is such that you've reduced the impact, but the second is the documented proof, and in order to provide the robustness levels. So at a low level of robustness, you get no credit, and at a medium level of robustness, you're getting -1 and then versus -2. So what we're saying is that we must have documented evidence And that would include obviously the range as well in that. So you do need to just check with the manufacturer is the person, and we can rely on that manufacturer's information for now until we have more reliable information, which will be available hopefully when we have C5 drones. So it's built into them.
Yeah, just to clarify on Julie's point there, a lot of the controllers actually have a monitoring system. So the DRS system has a go, no-go light, and some of the other ones actually have a signal level light attached. There's very few of them actually broadcast blind and hope that their signal is received. So I think in terms of independent link integrity, it is a monitorable thing, and you can tell when it is no longer present. So that is something to take heart in, I guess. John, welcome. How are you doing?
Hi, Bob. Thank you very much for that talk, and excellent to listen to everybody talking tonight. Yeah, just you didn't mention, Bob, maybe it's obvious, not to me though, what sort of costs are these various systems?
Apologies, that is probably the biggest elephant in the room that I didn't discuss. I can tell you this, if you're looking at something for an M300 system, for instance, so that would be something like these, you're talking anywhere between, I think, maybe 2,000 and 4,000 euros. But I think if any of the distributors in Ireland are on the channel, I would certainly welcome their input on that if my numbers are inaccurate. And then on the smaller systems, I remember having a talk with the guys down in Israel with Para-Zero, and one of the sentences I said was, why would I buy a system that costs more than the drone is designed to protect? And they promptly sent me an email a week later with a system that was half the price. So hopefully that was for one of the smaller units, I think one of the Mavic systems. I think they're coming in around 1,500, maybe 1,000 euros, but the guys in Ireland who distribute these systems will certainly tell you exactly how much they cost.
Thank you, Bob. That means in many cases, the retrieval system is more expensive than the drone it's protecting, as you said.
Indeed, there's a small but not unnoticeable element of box ticking with a lot of these systems, and that's just a cost of putting a drone in the air in the current regulatory environment in Ireland, and that's just the way of it. But yes. And
the other question, Bob, is well, what weight are they proportionate to the, if you like, the gross takeoff weight of the drone? I know it's not, there's no absolute answer to that, but just roughly.
Yeah, so I can't say for a lot of the other ones, but I can say on the DRS system, I think this is 400 and something grams relative to an MTOM of 9 kilograms for the actual drone itself. With the sort of standard payload, you're usually in around 7 with this particular drone. So you're adding, 400 more grams to that by installing this particular.
Okay. Yeah.
If anybody knows the weights of the other ones and wants to tell me those, I'd be more than happy.
I think the Mavic ones are about 165 grams. So. Okay. It's just the problem with that is a lot of them are up around 907 and so on, and it brings you above that 1 kilogram. So
yes,
you can fly in the Open A2, but then it's bringing you above 1 kilo as a max takeoff weight. You know, and also for them, we're going beyond the manufacturer's max takeoff weight and all sorts of other considerations around this. But for the much smaller ones, for the kind of Mavics and stuff like that, it's around 165 grams.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you very much, everybody.
And sorry, John, just to answer your question there that you answered, we have one on an M300 and it was about 3,500.
Okay, thank you very much.
Fergal.
Yeah, first of all, great presentation, Bob.
Thank you.
One thing I know you did cover at the end, but just wanted to push on it was the warranty. I know you said if you're attaching something to the drone, something to be conscious of, if you're soldering something in, you can be pretty much guaranteed your warranty is gone. And this is probably more relevant to the smaller drones like the Mavic. So if you just bought a new Mavic 3, the only real option is an internal soldered FTS. So you can kind of forget about any warranty. To just kind of make people aware of that, there aren't a huge amount of options for the smaller drones that aren't external as they are on the bigger drones. And then one other thing was on your picture of the Phantoms, just because the Phantom 4 RTK is so popular, the Para-Zero won't go on it because the GNSS module on top. You will have to go with something like the Dronavia or the Fruity Shoots. They're very popular with surveyors, obviously, so just something to be conscious of. And one last thing, just on the weights, the Dronavia singles effort is about 460 or something, and the double is 7, including the FTS, 780 or something like that in terms of weight. That
single.
one is the one consideration is it's bolted onto the drone. So it looks in that picture like it just screws on and screws off. It actually doesn't, and that's a mistake I made. It is there's cables coming out of it that you can't see in that picture that are physically attached in under screws on the arm mounts. So if it's on, it's staying on. You're not going to be taking that on and off in the field. So just something for people to consider.
That's an excellent point. Thank you, Fergal. Even simple considerations like if that's bolted on, you can't put the drone back in the case, or you got to buy a whole new flight case.
You can actually. The standard case they actually show in the diagram that you can cut out a bit, and it kind of you just unscrew it, and it's not. It works, like, but it's not ideal. But yeah, it just, you unscrew the top and kind of put it down in front of the FPV camera in the case. But yes, it is something you have to consider. The double canisters don't go in the case. Again, they've fitted it in somehow. I haven't managed to get it in, so I just carry them separately. But yeah, the case modification is something people also need to consider if you don't want to keep taking this on and off in the field.
Indeed. Thank you. I will add on the soldered connections. If you're purchasing a system like, for instance, the Para-Zero system, they use what are known as test points on the circuit boards. So even though you hear soldering, you think it's quite invasive, it's relatively non-invasive on the drone from a technical perspective. It should be done by somebody who's very good at soldering because they are quite small. But as Fergal says, your warranty is pretty much invalid if you're starting to perform that level of surgery on a board on a drone.
And the cables are tiny. I can attest to that. They are millimeter thick cables. Like, so you do want to be a good solderer to be taking that on.
Indeed. Thank you for that, Fergal. Dave?
Sorry, just
how you doing, gents?
Sorry, just to cut across you there, Bob and Fergal. Is there any of the suppliers here in Ireland actually not carrying out that procedure? Is Mark or Shane doing that?
As far as I'm aware, I thought they might be on the line. So Mark is capable of doing it. Whether or not he is still doing it, I'm not 100%. But I think talk to him on a case-by-case basis. I believe that Damien in DroneWorks Ireland now has the ability to work on Dronavia systems as well. Both of them, I believe, were fully vetted and trained by Dronavia. So either of those two guys should be able to help you.
Cool. Sorry, Dave, sorry.
No problem. Bob, thanks for that great presentation. I have a couple of queries, I suppose, about the flight characteristics of attaching some of these flight termination systems to one leg or one arm of your drone, considering it weighs something like, I think you have the DJ Matrice 300 there with the DRS system on it, that one there. So you've attached a 400-gram weight to one leg.
Indeed.
Now, ideally, I suppose the other props on the opposite side and the other side would have to account for the aerodynamics and the flight characteristics of this. So this is going to run the battery down, I would have thought, on certain systems, maybe not them all, but deteriorate
I can answer that quite easily. So the best way to consider any of these systems when they're installed is it's like you've got a wind or a breeze from that direction. the drone, that's all the drone actually feels. So the drone isn't thinking, wow, that arm is heavy. All the drone is feeling is, I've got a slight tilt in that direction and I compensate for it. With regard to battery life, certainly adding extra mass to any multi-rotor drone is going to reduce battery life. That's just basic physics. That there's nothing we can do about that. Whether it's a significant reduction, personally, I don't think it's massive. I'm going to throw out numbers completely unqualified and say maybe 10 to 20%, but it's certainly not something that has affected me massively in the field, and not something I'm overly concerned about. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does to a certain extent. Yeah, thanks.
Great. Mike.
Yes, hi. Just a question. I'm unfortunately, where I'm based is I'm under a control zone, so I have to go in the specific category one way or the other. And I fly an Inspire 2. So I've managed to locate and have on order since January, actually, a parachute system for that, which is the Skycat one, which also has a flight termination system that fortunately doesn't have to be soldered in, but is plugged in. But I haven't received it yet. But I suppose my question is, they are changing the system apparently because of, I think the delay was because of components or something like that. So I'm hoping to have it shortly. I haven't been able to fly since January here, literally because I haven't got it yet. But the question is, if the package itself puts your drone at or slightly above the maximum takeoff weight, what is the legal and insurance, like, because I don't know what the weight will be with this when it's finished, but I have a sneaky suspicion it'll be close enough to the maximum takeoff weight of the Inspire is 4 kg, I think, so it could be 4.01 or something like that.
Yeah, I can jump in for part of that, and just what I'd say is that most of these drones, the manufacturers publish max takeoff weight. A lot of this, take the smaller drones, maybe just leave out the Inspire just for a second, but on the smaller drones, they have a standard. They don't have interchangeable payloads, so by attaching a parachute to them, you're automatically going above their max takeoff weight. And that, again, from the insurance company's point of view, they are accepting that, in that, like Bob said, it is really the fact that you've gone slightly above. Yeah, you're going to develop more wear and tear on the drone. The motors are going to burn out, so on. But the insurance companies are accepting that as an acceptable risk on the basis that this is a regulatory requirement to attach them to it. So you're covered from an insurance point of view on that point, even though you are actually probably operating your drone above its max takeoff weight, above its manufacturer's limitations. And as I say, the insurance companies are accepting that. Again, the warranty issue is still there and still very much live on that. I don't know if that, Bob, if you want to add to that as well. Just.
No, that's everything I can add. Unfortunately, you're certainly in a gray zone there, Mike. I'm sorry we can't add more to it, but it's a gray zone. But I would say, look, if it's a system that's on the market and is well tested and you know, out there a while, like the Fruity Shoot Skycat system, I wouldn't be concerned about your drone.
Okay.
Yeah, that's all I can say, you know. Yes. Okay, Fergal, your hand is still raised there. I just wanted to make sure you don't have another question.
No, sorry, just never took it down.
No bother. Richard. Oh, you're muted, Richard.
Hello, Bob. Can you hear me?
Hey, Richard. That's great.
My
Thank you.
apologies there. My sincere apologies. So thanks very much for the presentation. Absolute great presentation. And thanks very much for Julie as well. Very informative. So I have a system myself. I suppose Julie was familiar with this because she got it through for the system for me for the IEA. So basically it's made by Skycat and then was modified by a company called Copter Max in Switzerland. So it's for the Inspire 2. I don't know if you can see it or not. It's kind of okay. So basically the parachute fits in here, it's spring loaded, then it goes in, you take off the nose of the Inspire 2 yourself, and it actually plugs in. So you have the FTS. So then basically what it does is stops the blades. So you have full control of the FOV camera. So you can see exactly altitude, you can see your head and all that kind of stuff. I've used it, and the only thing I find about it, it can be quite cumbersome. It's a bit of a look, you either kind of, I think it's a situation, you either leave it on or leave it off. There's a bit of work in putting it on. Weight wise, with parachute in it, battery, the whole lot. It's coming in at 466 grams. So that's exactly what it is.
That's great. Thank you for that, Richard. It's one system I don't have any experience with, is the Inspire range. So getting some insight on that was great. Thank you.
Yep, thanks, Bob.
And hopefully that might help Mike as well a little bit, just on that as well, just on the, because I know it's SkyCat that he has as well.
Yeah, it's the same system. It's from the same people, but at the moment, I say they're updating it, so that's why I haven't got it yet. I'm just waiting, and like I said, I have it ordered and paid for since January.
I think Mike have the big issue there, because I remember speaking with Copter Max, because I was in discussions with them with Fruity Toots, and there was an issue with the radio transmitters, and they had to be rebuilt or something like that.
Yes, yeah, he said something like that. So hopefully I'll have a bit this week or next week with any luck. So thanks.
No
Very
problem.
good. Matthew.
Thank you both for the talk. It was excellent. My question is do you know what frequencies most of these termination systems work in? I work in high RF areas, and I have had problems before where we've had interference. Do you have any insight with that?
I don't, but I know a guy who does. Declan, do you want to handle that one?
I don't know. I think at the start of this, Bob, I don't actually know the frequency. We looked at some of the chips, didn't we, at the very start of all this, and they seem to be in around the frequency of the IoT systems that we were looking at as well. But I can't remember the exact frequency, to be honest.
I do know there's typically an American and European version of these products. So purchasing and make sure you're purchasing the right version, let's say, if you are. But yeah, the exact frequencies, unfortunately, I don't know.
I think Matthew's come back there to say it was 466 megahertz.
That sounds very familiar.
Yeah. And
I think a lot of the EU ones are in 868 megahertz.
Yeah, I was going to say, some of them just doing a very quick, like the Unmanned Solutions, which the guys down, they've 869 on the megahertz, and the Drone Avia are talking about 2.4, but I don't think that's it won't be so. But certainly the yeah, exactly as Fergus said, 869, 868.
That was the consideration we had as well with a lot of the Internet of Things, particularly with the mobile telecom carriers here in Ireland, what frequency they're building out their networks now to cover the Internet of Things stuff as well. And that was a consideration we had at the start, a worry we had at the start actually, as to regards what that frequency was, and was it close to the same frequency that we find on the FTS systems. So again, it's another grey area. You know, there's a lot of grey areas in this whole thing. So it's I guess the case of just checking with the manufacturer.
Yeah, and the other thing is the cybersecurity issues that go on with this. I mean, it's huge, and the fact of you know, somebody looking to interfere with the aircraft when it's in flight as well, you know, and the possibility of it being remotely activated accidentally as well, by some other device. So that's what, yeah. And
it's nuts because a lot of that stuff, you see a lot of auto electronics now. You know, a lot of the RF in auto electronics is, again, it's around that same frequency as well. And mad stuff like warehouse doors, automatic doors, gates, all that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah, someone opens your gate and your drone falls out of the sky. It's not what you want to see.
No.
Yeah, so sorry, we're not too much help to you there, Matthew, but we've hopefully.
No, it's fine. I mean, we survey broadcast towers, so I know a bit about the RF stuff. Sometimes it doesn't matter what frequency you're running at; it just blats it out. No, that's great. Thank you very much for your input. I know I've looked at remote termination systems, the French systems and the American systems, and there's some of those work at 2.4 gig, which is completely pointless when you're flying near a tower that's got rural broadband on it. So I've had that with a survey drone where it's just lost the plot. And luckily it was only the video connection, not the control connection, that was getting taken out.
I find a lot of that, Matthew, you know, along especially along 4G towers and stuff and 5G. You know, some of them operate around that frequency as well. So best thing is try and stay about 10 meters away from the tower or the panel antenna if you can, and hopefully you won't have any issues.
Yeah, okay. Thanks very much.
Any more questions from anybody?
Just one last comment from me, Bob, on the Dronavia system. The button is lovely and neat, but when you actually look at where it's mounted, I personally made the decision they have a second button that gets wired in, and I went with that in case of accidental activation, because where you generally mount it is kind of on the controller, and to me it would be quite easy to accidentally drop a thumb on it or something like that. So I got the second button. I think it's €90 and it just gets wired in. You have to push the two of them together, so just as an extra level of safety that you're not going to just fire it.
That's a very interesting one, actually, because I think most of the other systems are 2-button activation. So you're saying on the Dronavia systems, the default product is a single button activation?
Yeah. It's just a duplicate of that little button, and there's a wire runs between the two of them, but I just felt safer having the second one.
Indeed. Okay, very good. Thank you.
I see, Richard, you have your hand up there again. I'm not sure whether your hand is still up from before. Or is that? Okay, perfect. And
Dave?
Yeah, I just have another quick one there for you. We're looking to buy another Mavic for the university. Is there anybody in the market selling them with the FTSs built on already? Or are we having to buy these separately?
I don't think there's anybody selling them. However, I think if you talk to any of the 3 suppliers in Ireland, they will provide you with a package and they'll give you decent support on that. They'll integrate it for you, help you set it up, give you some advice on utilizing it and all that sort of thing. So there's certainly no box that you can lift off a shelf that contains a drone and a parachute. But the guys in all the major drone suppliers in Ireland are excellent for their service. So I would talk to them.
Okay, thanks a million.
No problem.
And thanks, Richard. I see Richard just dropped in the Inspire, the Copter Max FTS modification. I think that was towards an earlier question. So if you want to download that, it's just in the chat. We want to open the chat and have a look at that. It's there, so you can see how it attaches to the Inspire.
Thank you.
Just one comment on the Mavics. The new Mavic 3 obviously is far better battery position. The old one, you have to power down the whole parachute to change the battery, and that's something to consider. Whereas the new one, it ejects out the back, because they all basically mount on top of the battery. So if you do have a Mavic 2, try to consider that you will have to shut it down.
Yeah.
I don't know if you try to take that off with the system powered up, whether it's going to fire in your hand. I don't know. I wouldn't like to try it, but just something to consider.
Interestingly, you say that, Fergal. The AVSS system put their strapping system around the back now for some reason, which I cannot fathom at all.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they seem to have basically said, oh, we need to retain that particular design flaw in their new system. So yeah, but I think there are other manufacturers coming out with Mavic 3 systems that will go over the top, which means that there won't be that issue, which is a great design feature.
That's great. That's a great point, Fergal. And it just sparks something else off in my mind, that one of the requirements of a flight termination system is that it's tested on the ground prior to flight. Okay, so just make sure that if your parachute does arm at 0 and you're testing your flight termination system, that it doesn't activate the parachute. Some of them have a false cylinder that you put in, that you attach into the parachute. Some of them you don't arm the parachute until after you've tested, but it is a requirement to test the flight termination system on the ground prior to every flight. So just be aware of that and don't activate your parachute accidentally, or or you very much rely on Bob's advice that you can repackage yourself. And so just be aware of that too.
Indeed.
Yeah, just the ASTM ones, as far as I know, are required to go back to either manufacturer or an authorized service center to maintain the ASTM certification. So if you are buying one of them, you will have to send it back. You definitely can't self-pack those ones.
Okay.
And obviously they're generally American-based systems, so.
Yeah, I mean, this market seems to be a market that's very much opening up with the European requirements. So I would hope that over the next over the next short period of time, we'll have more choice on this side of the water as well, and also the standards actually published as well. I know EuroK here are doing some great work on the standards around these as well. So we should have those hopefully fairly soon as well, which will give us a European standard, which you know, even if it's not an EASA standard, it still would be preferable to the ATSM. So and I think the ATSM, it's really the EuroK is going to be based on the ATSM. Thanks, Josh. You'd see Josh just put in there it's going to be published with 20 more after 20 more tests. So yeah.
So I think somebody's asking there who the main drone suppliers are. Just very quickly, Munster Drone Services, that's Shane. Unmanned Solutions, that's Mark, and Drone Works Ireland, that's Damien. All three of those guys will be able to help you out. Okay, if we don't have any more questions, I guess we can leave it at that. This should be going on to the UAI YouTube channel in the near future. So you will be able to reference back to it and look at the various systems. And if you're in the market for one of these, be able to make some decisions based on what we've presented here today. So if nobody has any other questions, we'll leave it at that. And thank you very much.
Thanks a million, Bob. Really great presentation. And just if anybody has any suggestions, we're hoping at some point to get the Data Protection Commissioner online to have a conversation about data protection, and also then, but if anybody has any suggestions for any other talks as well that they would really like to hear about or anything else, that would be great as well, because we do want to make sure that we're facilitating our members when we do these talks and in what they actually want to hear about and the difficulties and issues that they're having in the field. So please get in touch with us. And thanks everyone for coming online.
Can I just hop in quickly?
Sure. Oh, sorry, yeah, and Tony's, that was the next thing was Tony's, but you go ahead, you talk about it.
Well done, Bob, that was brilliant. On the 9th of July in Roundwood and Wicklow, we're having a fly-in chat between 12 noon and 4 o'clock. So if you would like to fly in A3 without an FTS and in G airspace, you're more than welcome to come up. And we've a good few people signed up at the moment, so there'll be an opportunity to fly your drone and to just have a chat with other drone pilots. And yeah, so we'd love to see you there. So that's Saturday week.
Is that an assembly of people, Tony?
They'll be involved, people, individual.
They'll be involved, Fergal, don't you worry.
We'll keep you spread out so you'll be able to.
We'll make sure people can avoid the drone. Yeah, exactly.
Just to be clear, I'm very much hoping to be there. I'll have my M300 system, but more importantly, I'll have my parachute system with me. So if anybody wants to have a quick look at that and see what it looks like on the aircraft and all that, and hopefully there'll be a few other operators with their systems as well, so that we can actually see these things in the wild and see how they actually look and so on.
And Bob, if it helps, sorry, Julie, it's Bart here. We're happy to bring up our M300 with the parachute system on it as well, if anybody wants to have a look at it.
That's great. Thank you very much, Bart.
Thanks, Bart. Just Greg put in there, and just every company is trained with the IPC capability is capable to install the systems on your drones without voiding the warranty. So is that back from DJI though, Greg, as well? Just because I don't know that DJI are accepting the third party equipment being installed on their aircraft, particularly where it pushes, where it's not a system they've approved. I know there is some DJI recommended systems out there, so I suppose that could be something.
Great.
Okay, everyone, thanks so much for this evening, and Bob, thanks so much for a really excellent presentation. It was great. I think I really enjoyed it, and hugely informative. So thanks.
It was our pleasure. Thank you very much,
Great stuff,
everybody.
Bob.
Cheers, lads.
Okay. See
Thanks very
everyone
much, guys.
soon.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye
Bye-bye.
now.